Welcome to another Coffee with Alissa video. Today, we are going to be shifting gears and discussing behavioral finance. This is a topic that we introduced to you last summer when we sent out the book, The Psychology of Money, and provided you with a video series of interviews with the author, as well as a video forum with our advisors. Today, I'm going to be interviewing Nancy Bells, a licensed professional counselor at Cranberry Psychological Center. She primarily uses a solution-focused approach and works with adults and couples to address a variety of mental health issues, emotional struggles, and situational difficulties, including depression, anxiety, relationship issues, parenting challenges, communication skills, conflict resolution, work-related stress, phase of life transitions, and challenges with decision-making. Before transitioning into professional counseling, Nancy spent 25 years working in business and finance, including 15 years at Federated Investors as a VP and senior investment analyst. So I think she'll be able to give us a really great balance of psychology, but also having a finance background. So Nancy, let's start out. What is behavioral finance, or sometimes also referred to as behavioral economics?
Yeah. And I think I got my start with the notion of the wording behavioral economics, but what it really is the study of some of the biases or tendencies or heuristics that we consciously or often subconsciously use when we are making decisions, including finance, life patterns, and they sometimes can really influence us in ways that we're not quite as objective as we want to be.
That's great. And can you tell us what some of the most common of these biases are?
Sure. And I could go on forever because there's quite a few and they're all very common. But one of the main ones that is talked about the most is what we call confirmation bias. And that's our tendency to take in the information that confirms an already held belief or a decision that we want to make and give less value to the information that may conflict with it. So we want to try and confirm it. And like an example of this might be if I already have made up my mind that I want to buy a particular, let's say a property to flip, and I already know that I want it, I'm going to stick with it, I may start to stop looking at relevant information because I want to just confirm it's a good decision to do. And I'm going to throw a few more at you, and I'm going to say that these layer sometimes, because the next one I want to mention is what we call self-attribution. And that's a tendency to make choices based on overconfidence in our own knowledge or skill. And often it's based on having some small knowledge or skill in a particular area, but we amplify it larger. So if I use the example of wanting to buy a fixer-upper so I can flip it and sell it, I may overconfidently say, well, I'm sure I can do all the updates and repairs myself because I did change the toilet in the bathroom and was pretty good at that. Whereas I should be more objective in looking at that. One that I always like to throw in talking about this is what we call decision fatigue. And that's the notion that decision-making takes a lot of energy. And so often, like at the end of the day, we've used all our decision-making energy, and we may not make as good of decisions at the end of the day when we're worn out. And often, like parents might find at the end of the day, they'll say to their kids, I just don't care, do whatever you want. But we can also make those experience decision fatigue in our own lives and our experiences. And one example that came to mind when I was thinking about this is that my husband and I just did a major remodeling to finish our basement. And there were so many decisions that had to be made there. And I think at one point I just said, I am so done making decisions. I don't care what we do. And I did care. And I took a breath and I said, can we table this decision until tomorrow, or I can do some more research, so to just be aware of that. And then the final one, and I'm going to bombard you with some examples on this one, is the biases that we call anchoring. And in its purest form, anchoring is when we tend to make a decision based on the first piece of information available. And And I will give you an example of that. But there are other things that people can anchor to, whether it be a particular way of thinking in life, whether it be based on prior decisions, whether it be based on the way we grew up, that sometimes we can be anchored to it in a way that makes us less objective.
So what are some examples that you see in anchoring? Because I know that is a very common behavioral issue that we notice.
Yeah. And that is interesting. I'm sure that you probably do notice that when you work with some of the different clients is, I'll give you first the simplest example, like anchoring around a single decision. As I mentioned, the basement remodel, we had to buy a new larger screen TV than I was familiar with. And so let's say that, Alissa, I mentioned this to you and said, I'm in the market for a new TV. And you said, I just bought one last year and I paid about $1,500, and that's a really good deal for the TV. That's probably what you should look for. And so then let's say I go out and do some research, but I keep coming back to that anchor of what you said, the $1,500. And so let's say that I find a really good deal at Costco that is $2,000. And I've done a lot of good research and it really is the right deal for me, but I become anchored to that $1,500 that you said. It might make me pass up what would be a really good deal for me because of, again, being too tightly anchored to that single piece of information. And we can see how that could impact us in a different way if by chance you said, you should never spend more than $800, otherwise you're paying for unnecessary extra features. And if that then was my anchor, I'd probably buy a whole different TV. So again, just not to get too tightly tied to that. Another example I like to bring up has to do with having a particular mindset that I bet you run into this with your clients too, whether it be based on a mindset of scarcity or a mindset of abundance. And an example I had that comes to mind is a couple years ago, I was working with a couple. They were in their 40s. They were both professionals, so they were in a good financial position. But they came in one morning and they introduced that they had had a conflict on the way over. The husband had just bought a brand new iPad, top of the line, and his wife was very concerned about making that purchase. And as we talked a little bit more about it, the husband was saying, well, it's no big deal. He said, just this morning, I got the quarterly statement for my 401k. We are in good financial position. He was anchored from a sense of abundance. Mm-hmm. She then said, hey, but this morning I opened up the bill from the emergency room visit at the hospital for one of their kids, and there's some costs that aren't going to be covered by insurance. So she was coming from a model of scarcity. And so we might ask, is it okay that he buy the iPad? I don't know, but it shouldn't be anchored by that abundance of a 401k or the scarcity of some uncovered medical costs. Mm-hmm. And with that too, I often take people back to the notion to try and understand our upbringing can have some imprinting on us, you know, what we see, what we follow, that can anchor us. And many of us either come from an anchored upbringing of scarcity or abundance, and it can impact us in our adult decisions. And they're not necessarily wrong. We just want to understand the particular impact. And I often will refer back, I was raised more from an anchoring of a model of scarcity. You know, we were fine, we weren't impoverished, but there were 6 kids. I knew the value of $1. It served me very well in my adult life. I made good financial decisions, but I had to lift the anchor on some of what we did growing up and give myself permission in adulthood to change some patterns. And the one I laughed the most about is when we were growing up with 6 kids, in the rare instances that you went to a restaurant, everyone ordered water. That's just what you do. And it took me well into my 20s when I didn't feel guilt when I ordered something other than water. And the final one I'm going to mention is that sometimes our past decision-making can create an anchor for future decision making, so that we might fall into a particular pattern that we call arbitrary coherence, where past decisions can create the set points for which we judge value and worth, and it can almost become automatic and not examined. So if I have a set point for what a cup of coffee should cost, I can arbitrarily try and create coherence there, or a hotel room, or a new car. And it doesn't mean that we don't want to use those as evaluative points, but we have to look at the particular circumstance that we're in for each decision. And I hope I didn't overload you there with so many examples, but I'm pretty passionate about identifying these and understanding how they impact us.
No, I love it. I really appreciate it. And I was totally jiving with you on the water at restaurants. I would say I grew up in a very similar manner where I can't buy anything that's not on super sale, right?
Yeah, and I would still say, it's that notion where I am still judicious on what I might pay at a restaurant, and that that I still am judicious there. And often if water is my choice, I will get it. But if I like hazy IPAs. And so I'm allowed to buy one now, which it feels very empowering,
It is. And it's so good to have these conversations, especially with a partner, to really understand, I'll call it, for lack of better words, like your money personality, right? And how you grow up and understand that, because it's probably different from your partners. And I know my husband and I have spent some time figuring out what ours are, and then trying to kind of connect dots and see how we can merge those and both flex. So we did a video a while back on the importance of having an advisor and why people tend to be happier statistically with a financial advisor. And one of the reasons ended up being is because you end up having these tough conversations, some of which about money personality, behavioral issues that you don't think to bring up yourself, but third party is able to bring up to you.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And also it's interesting, even the notion about whether or not we have an advisor. I'm going to say that sometimes the biases of self-attribution gets in the way of people getting advisors. I just want to throw that in, because sometimes I will encourage somebody to say, hey, you're at this stage of life, you're really need someone to do financial projections for you. And someone will say, I can do that myself. And, and I will try and steer them to seek more help with that. Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, what else can we do to avoid allowing these biases to inappropriately impact our financial decision making?
I would say being aware of them, and someone can Google and see there's a lot of them out there. I shared some of the more common ones, but just to be aware in your own patterns when especially with the anchoring, that you're not arbitrarily stuck on particular anchors that may impact your objectivity when making decisions. I do think understanding sometimes in the area of anchors where they came from. So Alissa, you and I both came from a model of more scarcity growing up. It sounds like, and our ability to understand that and where it came from, it might allow us to have more grace and compassion for it, but still not let it impact our decisions. Also, the final thing I would say is to really question, like, a pattern of behavior that made sense at one point in life may not make sense at different points in life. Our spending patterns pre-kids may have worked well pre-kids. They may be different during kids. They may be different after kids. They may be different old. There's different phases of life. And an example that came up this morning, it had to do with car buying patterns, is that somebody was used to, throughout their life, to buy a car and run it as long as they could and get every ounce of value out of it. But as they've gotten older, they realize that they need more security with a car. They don't want to be changing a tire somewhere. They don't want to have it in the shop. So the individual I was talking with, they were deciding to get more into a model of buying a new car every 4 to 5 years. So again, just sometimes when we watch what we're anchored to with a past decision, re-examining it might leave an openness to a different way to be doing things that might make more sense.
Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate you taking time to meet with me today and
Certainly.
discuss all of these things with our viewers. Before we finish up, I would love it if you have any book recommendations for us.
I have two that I wanted to point out. One that's is called Predictably Irrational: The Hidden Forces That Shape Our Decisions. It's by a man, Dan Ariely, and it's a really, really easy read. I have the Audible version and have listened to it multiple times, and it really does identify a lot of those biases that we have. But for those that really want to dig deep into this, there's a book called Thinking Fast and Slow by a gentleman, Daniel Kahneman. And he actually won the Nobel Prize for his work in behavioral economics. And I'm just in awe of this man. But real quick on that too, is his thing with thinking fast and slow is he talks about fast thinking being that fast, intuitive, and emotional decision making, whereas slow thinking is the slower, more deliberate, and more logical thinking, and that we figure out which thinking, fast or slow, applies to particular decision making. And so, for example, if we're sitting together having dinner out and I'm trying to pick my entree, I should use fast thinking. Otherwise, everyone's going to be very angry with me for delaying dinner. But I should be using slow thinking if I'm deciding whether I relocate to Seattle or Des Moines. And sometimes people will say, well, I'm just going to trust my gut. I'll say, no, don't trust your gut on the big ones.
Yes. Wonderful. Well, we will stay in touch and make sure to get that out to everybody.
Yeah.
Again, I appreciate your time today. I appreciate everybody watching, and make sure to mark your calendar for our upcoming webinar. We'll dive deeper into this topic and take your questions. It will be held the morning of September 22nd. Have a great day.
Thank you.